Hello, and welcome to Bible Study 24H, the place where we explore moving sacred stories and profound lessons of faith. Today, we invite you to join us on an emotional and luminous journey, recounting the final moments of Pope Francis with the most loyal companion of his life, his beloved dog, Balthasar. It is a simple yet deeply sacred story where unconditional love shines brightly at the threshold between life and eternity. If this story touches your heart, please don't forget to like this video to spread the message of love, share it with your loved ones, and subscribe to Bible Study 24H to continue walking with us through journeys of faith and compassion. Now let's dive into one of the most beautiful final chapters of a great life. The morning over Vatican City was unlike any other. A thin mist clung to the marble columns and drifted across St. Peter's Square, softening the outlines of the ancient basilica and cloaking everything in a hushed, reverent stillness. The bells, which usually rang with firm authority, now tolled with a slower, almost sorrowful rhythm, as if they too sensed the weight of the moment approaching. Inside the Apostolic Palace, the corridors were unusually silent. Conversations fell into murmurs, steps became lighter, and even the ever-watchful Swiss guards stood with a solemn rigidity, their vibrant uniforms a stark contrast to the somber air. It was as though the very stones of the Vatican walls were holding their breath, waiting. In one of the most private rooms surrounded by centuries of history and faith, Pope Francis lay resting, his breath slow, his face serene. The man who had touched millions with his humility, his compassion, and his unwavering love for the most vulnerable was nearing the end of his earthly journey. Yet in these final hours, he asked for none of the pomp or ceremony that often accompanies figures of his stature. No grand farewells from world leaders, no solemn processions of dignitaries. His only request was simple, heartbreakingly pure. He wanted to see Balthasar, his faithful canine companion. To many, Balthasar was just a dog, a loyal creature who had quietly accompanied the Pope through countless silent reflections and lonely evenings. But to Francis, Balthasar embodied something far greater, a living testament of unconditional love, the same love he had spent his life preaching and striving to embody. Whispers of the Pope's final request spread quickly through the halls like a sacred secret. Cardinals exchanged glances heavy with emotion. Assistants wept quietly in corners. Doctors debated whether the meeting would be wise, but no one dared to deny the man his final wish. For those who truly knew Francis, this moment was not a surprise. From the alleyways of Buenos Aires, where a young Jorge Mario Bergoglio once fed stray dogs with his own meager lunch, to the papal throne of St. Peter, his heart had always belonged to the least among us, to the forgotten, the abandoned, the small and voiceless. Choosing the name Francis after the saint who spoke to animals and called even the wolves his brothers had been no mere gesture. It was a declaration that love in its purest form knows no barriers. And now, at the twilight of his life, all the titles, all the accolades, all the mighty deeds faded away. Only the essence remained. A man and his loyal friend, bonded by a love deeper than words. The stage was set for one final transcendent encounter, one that would move the hearts of the world and remind us all that in the end it is love, not power, that defines a life well lived. At Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence nestled amid the rolling hills outside Rome, Balthasar lay curled in a quiet corner of the garden. The light-colored dog, once so lively, had grown somber in recent weeks, as if his heart somehow mirrored the condition of his beloved master. He spent his days resting beside an old cassock, a garment worn so many times by the Pope, inhaling its fading scent with a loyalty that neither time nor distance could diminish. It was there that Sister Teresa, a gentle soul devoted to tending the gardens, found him when the urgent call came through. Her hands trembled slightly as she hung up the phone. She knelt down beside Balthasar, running her fingers through his soft fur. "We're going, little one," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "He's waiting for you." Balthasar's ears perked up as if he understood every word. Without resistance, he allowed Sister Teresa to lift him into the back seat of the black Vatican car sent to retrieve them. As the engine roared softly to life, the dog pressed his body closer to the worn cassock that Sister Teresa had brought along, his steady gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. During the journey, the nun gently stroked his back, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "He knows," she murmured to the driver, who glanced at the rearview mirror, offering only a solemn nod. Words seemed inadequate for the sacredness unfolding inside that simple car. Miraculously, Rome's notoriously chaotic traffic parted for them, as if the very city itself understood the urgency. No horns blared, no crowds pressed in. Their path to the Vatican was smooth, unbroken, like a river of grace flowing toward its destined end. As they crossed through the gate of St. Anne, Swiss, guards stood in full salute, but Balthasar needed no leash, no command. He stepped from the car with quiet dignity, his movements slow but sure, as if following an invisible guide. Those who saw him pass by spoke in hushed awe afterward about the way he moved like a pilgrim completing a sacred journey, his head slightly bowed, his gait steady and solemn. Cardinals and monsignors, powerful men accustomed to the protocols of the Vatican, instinctively stepped aside, some bowing slightly in respect to the silent traveler. Through winding marble corridors that had witnessed centuries of power and prayer, Balthasar walked without hesitation. He knew exactly where to go, drawn by a bond that transcended walls, rituals, and even the finality of death. His paws barely made a sound on the ancient floors, yet every step echoed with meaning. When he reached the heavy doors of the papal chamber, he paused. Sister Teresa, holding back tears, looked to the Pope's physician for guidance. After a silent, solemn nod, the door creaked open. For a moment, Balthasar remained motionless, gathering himself. And then, with the kind of reverence no human could have taught, he crossed the threshold into the room. Inside, the atmosphere was dense, not with fear, but with a sacred stillness. The doctors, nurses, priests, all who stood witness, fell into deeper silence, their hearts aware they were beholding something holy. Francis lay in his bed, his breathing shallow but peaceful, his hands, the same hands that had blessed millions, resting gently on the sheets, his face illuminated by the soft light of a setting sun filtering through a half-open window, seemed almost otherworldly, already touched by eternity. Balthasar approached slowly, each step a testament to his devotion. He did not whimper. He did not bark. He simply moved with purpose, as if offering his own spirit to bridge the chasm forming between life and the unknown. Reaching the bedside, Balthasar sat down, his brown eyes deep pools of ancient understanding, gazing at his beloved friend. For long minutes he remained there, unmoving, embodying a silence more profound than any prayer ever uttered by human lips. It was a scene that would be etched into every soul present, a final act of love offered not with words but with pure presence. A dog and a dying man bound by something infinitely larger than time or death. The long journey was complete. Balthasar had come home. As Balthasar crossed the threshold into the papal chamber, the air itself seemed to change. It thickened dense with reverence, sorrow, and a quiet anticipation that gripped every soul in the room. No one spoke, no one dared to move. They simply watched breathless as the small figure of the dog made his way toward the towering bed where Pope Francis lay. It was not a hurried approach, nor was there hesitation. Each step was deliberate, filled with a kind of solemnity that transcended the limitations of instinct or training. It was the movement of a heart that understood without a single word the gravity of what was unfolding. Francis lay still, his face bathed in the ethereal glow of the early evening light that spilled gently through the open window. His breaths came shallow and slow, each one a fragile thread, connecting him to a world he was already beginning to leave behind. His hands, the same hands that had touched the untouchables, blessed the poor and held the broken, now rested motionless atop the crisp white sheets. Around him stood a handful of trusted aides, doctors, and clergy, all holding vigil in a silence so profound it seemed the very walls of the room were praying with them. Balthasar approached the bedside with the dignity of a royal envoy. He paused just beside the edge of the bed, sitting quietly, his warm brown eyes fixed intently on the face of the man he had loved beyond measure. He did not whine, nor did he seek to be noticed. He simply was fully present, offering the only thing that mattered. Now his unwavering companionship. His presence filled the room with an unspoken language, far more powerful than any sermon, a silent witness to the kind of loyalty that neither power, nor status, nor even death could corrupt. After a few long moments, something miraculous happened. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Pope Francis stirred. His right hand, so frail and light, moved just a few centimeters across the sheet, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, had Balthasar not seen it instantly. Without hesitation and with a gentleness that seemed almost sacred, Balthasar leaned forward and rested his head near the outstretched hand, not pressing against it, not seeking to be petted, but merely offering his nearness. A sigh so faint it was barely audible escaped from the Pope's lips. No one in the room could say for certain whether he was aware of the gesture, but in that fleeting moment, a peace deeper than any visible sign seemed to descend over him. His face, already serene, softened further, as if he had finally received the final blessing his heart had yearned for, the presence of a love pure and unconditional. Sister Teresa, standing quietly by the door, pressed her hands together in silent prayer. A young priest, overcome by the sight, turned away to hide the tears that brimmed in his eyes. Even the most seasoned doctors, men and women trained to remain detached in the face of life and death, found themselves blinking rapidly, struggling to maintain their composure before this quiet, overwhelming exchange between man and beast. Outside, the first stars had begun to prick the velvet sky over Rome. In St. Peter's Square, thousands of candles shimmered like a sea of tiny suns, a spontaneous gathering of faithful hearts who, without instruction or announcement, had come to pray. It was as though the world itself had paused, breathing in unison with the fragile rhythm of the Pope's final hours. Within the chamber, time seemed to stretch and fold in upon itself, every second elongated, heavy with meaning, sacred beyond comprehension. Balthasar remained absolutely still, the muscles beneath his soft coat tense with devotion, his head resting so lightly near the Pope's hand that he could feel the ebb and flow of the dying man's final breaths. His loyalty was not loud or demanding. It was silent, patient, and utterly complete, the purest reflection of the love Francis had always sought to model for the world. In that room, under the waning light of a Vatican evening, something transcendent occurred. It was not marked by fanfare or miracles or grand declarations. It was far simpler and infinitely more profound. A faithful dog sitting vigil at the bedside of a dying man, embodying the truth that the greatest acts of love often require no words at all, and so they remained, man and dog, pope and friend, suspended between two worlds, teaching everyone present and everyone who would one day hear their story that, in the final accounting of life, it is not our titles, achievements, or possessions that matter most. It is love. It is presence. It is the simple, undying bond between two souls who have walked the road together to its very end. Minutes passed, though, in that sacred room. Time no longer obeyed ordinary measure. It moved like the tide, slow, inevitable, solemn. Every heartbeat, every breath drawn and exhaled by those present, seemed synchronized to the quiet rhythm of the one man lying at the center of it all, Pope Francis, the shepherd of millions, the voice for the voiceless. The bridge between heaven and earth was now nothing more than a humble soul preparing to cross the great divide. Balthasar remained motionless beside him, a sentinel of love, his muzzle lightly brushed against the Pope's pale hand, his body still and composed, as though he understood that this moment required not action, but pure, unwavering presence. In the depths of his ancient knowing eyes, there was no fear, only a profound acceptance, a readiness to accompany his beloved friend as far as loyalty and devotion could allow. Outside the chamber, St. Peter's Square became a living, breathing sea of prayer. Without official summons, thousands had gathered, candles in hand, voices raised in whispered hymns, their faces turned toward the illuminated dome that crowned the Vatican. The square, so often a place of grand ceremony, was now transformed into a vast sanctuary of silent hope and mourning. Across the world, news outlets broke into their broadcasts, speaking in hushed, reverent tones, sensing that something beyond history was about to unfold. Inside, Francis's breathing grew lighter, thinner, like a candle flickering low before surrendering to the wind. His chest rose and fell with greater effort, and then with less and less still until his breaths became nearly imperceptible. Yet within the room there was no panic, no desperate rush. The doctors watched the monitors with quiet understanding. The cardinals bowed their heads in prayer. Even the mechanical beeping of the machine seemed to soften, as if technology itself bowed before the holiness of the moment. Then it happened so gently that it almost escaped notice. At exactly 11:17 p.m., Pope Francis exhaled a final, delicate breath. There was no dramatic gasp, no visible struggle, only a soft, almost musical sigh, the kind a man might release when setting down a great burden after a long, faithful journey. His face, already serene, took on an even greater peace, as if illuminated from within by a light no earthly sun could provide. Balthasar, sensing the change, lifted his head. His deep brown eyes searched the still face of his master, reading the silence that now spoke louder than any words. Slowly, with infinite tenderness, the dog rose to his feet, circled the bed once in a motion that felt almost ritualistic, and then returned to the bedside. This time, he gently placed his muzzle against Francis's cold cheek, offering the final kiss of farewell, an anointing made not with oil or water, but with love. No one in the room moved. No one spoke. Tears glistened in every eye, but there was no sobbing. Only a heavy, sacred stillness, the silence of those who know they have witnessed something holy. A few priests quietly began whispering the ancient prayers of commendation for the departing soul, their Latin words weaving through the air like a soft, invisible shroud. In that moment, a cool breeze stirred through the half-open window, fluttering the white curtains like ghostly wings. Some said it was coincidence. Others believed it was the whisper of the Spirit itself come to carry the soul of the gentle Pope home outside. At the very same instant, thousands of candles in the square seemed to flare brighter for a heartbeat, casting a golden glow across the faces of the mourners gathered below. Balthasar stood quietly by the window, his gaze lifted toward the sky. He remained in his post a faithful guardian, keeping watch not over a dying man now, but over the memory of a life fully, beautifully lived. It was not duty that kept him there. It was something deeper, older, a love forged beyond time, beyond death, in the sacred heart of creation itself. At the bedside, the chief physician finally stepped forward, checking for a pulse, feeling. The silence settled deep into his bones. With a voice barely above a whisper and a heart heavy with sorrow and reverence, he pronounced the words that would soon echo across the globe. His Holiness Pope Francis has passed away. And with those words, a chapter closed not just in the history of the Church, but in the story of humanity itself. A chapter marked not by grand conquests or earthly triumphs, but by compassion, humility, and a love so simple, so pure, that it moved mountains not with force, but with gentleness. And at the very heart of that story, as eternal witness to its final breath, sat a light-furred dog named Balthasar, the living embodiment of a truth the world often forgets, that love in its purest form outlasts even death. As the announcement spread through the corridors of the Vatican, a profound stillness engulfed the sacred city. It was not the kind of silence born from shock or confusion, but a silence heavy with reverence, the kind that falls upon the world when a light has quietly gone out, leaving behind an aching darkness only love can fill. Inside the papal chamber, no one moved to disturb the scene. The body of Pope Francis lay at rest, his face illuminated by the pale glow of the moon, serene and still untouched by the worldly concerns he had so often carried upon his shoulders. And there, steadfast as ever, Balthasar remained by his side, refusing to be led away, refusing to leave his final post. It was as if the faithful dog understood that this moment did not belong to the living. It belonged to the sacred, to the eternal, and he would guard it with the same devotion he had given in life. When the officials finally gathered the courage to step forward, it was done with a slowness, a care usually reserved for the holiest relics. The Pope's body was gently prepared according to ancient tradition, dressed in the simple white vestments he had worn countless times, a wooden rosary carved by Franciscan monks placed tenderly in his hands. Around him, candles flickered like small stars, battling the vastness of the night, their golden flames dancing in silent homage. Still, no one disturbed Balthasar. He sat then, lay down again at the foot of the bed, resting his head on his paws, his breathing deep and slow as if anchoring the room in a gravity beyond sorrow, beyond grief. Sister Teresa approached him quietly, crouching beside him and whispering soft words of comfort, though she knew that no leash, no coaxing could move him until he chose. It was time. She simply sat with him, sharing the sacred vigil between man and beast. At dawn, just as the first tender rays of sunlight began to stream through the grand windows of the Apostolic Palace, something extraordinary happened, something that would be whispered about for years in hushed, reverent tones. A white dove, one of the countless that filled St. Peter's Square, flew in through the open window. It did not flutter about in confusion. It did not startle at the humans or the dog. It simply perched upon the headboard of the bed directly above Pope Francis's still form and sat motionless, as if participating in the last rites in its own silent way. Balthasar lifted his head at the arrival of the dove, his brown eyes meeting the bird's black shining ones. For a long moment they regarded each other, two creatures, simple and pure, bearing witness to the departure of a soul far greater than either of them could understand. Then, just as quietly, the dove took flight again, disappearing into the pale morning sky, leaving behind an air of mystery, a hush of divinity. By mid-morning, the preparations for the public farewell began in earnest. The doors of St. Peter's Basilica were thrown open to the faithful, and throngs of mourners began to pour in, many clutching rosaries, photographs, and handwritten prayers. Yet among the bustling of crowds and the grandeur of rituals, whispers about Balthasar had already started to circulate, stories of the Pope's faithful companion, who had remained with him to the end, whose silent devotion had become the most powerful eulogy of all. As the formalities unfolded, Sister Teresa finally approached Balthasar once more. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, whispering again, "Come now, little one, you've fulfilled your mission." This time, the dog rose. His movements were slow, dignified, as though carrying not just his own weariness, but the solemnity of a world in mourning. He followed her down the long corridors past the tearful faces of guards, clergy, and lay workers who all stepped aside as he passed. Some bowed their heads in silent respect. Others reached out to brush their fingers lightly against his fur. A touch not of ownership, but of reverence. Balthasar bore it all with quiet grace, embodying in that moment the legacy of the man they had lost: humility, compassion, and an unbreakable silent strength. As he left the apostolic palace, stepping into the golden light of a new day, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica began to toll once more, not with sorrow this time, but with a steady, measured rhythm. A call to remember, not what had ended, but what had been given. The story of Pope Francis would be told for generations in sermons in history, books in whispered prayers under starlit skies. Yet among all the mighty deeds and grand speeches, there would always be a place reserved for the humble, four-legged companion who had shown the world that the purest love often needs no words at all. After the solemn farewell, while the world's attention turned to the grand ceremonies unfolding beneath the vast arches of St. Peter's Basilica, Balthasar quietly vanished from public view. No official announcement marked his departure, no procession accompanied him. Under the gentle care of Sister Teresa, he was moved to a small Benedictine monastery, nestled among the rolling hills of Umbria, a place where the clamor of the world could not intrude, where silence and prayer were the language of daily life. There, among ancient olive groves and fields of lavender swaying in the wind, Balthasar found his new home. The monks welcomed him with open arms, not as a pet but as a pilgrim, a living relic of a life that had touched theirs from afar. They did not seek to replace the bond he had lost, nor to claim his loyalty for themselves. They simply offered him a quiet companionship, mirroring the spirit he had exemplified, steadfast, patient, and filled with an abiding peace. Each day, Balthasar walked the monastery grounds alongside the brothers, moving slowly among the trees and vineyards, his pace steady, his gaze often distant. In the evenings he would curl up by the great stone hearth in the common room, resting his head on his paws as the abbot, a kindly man with silver hair and a soft voice, read aloud from the scriptures. It was as if Balthasar understood every word, as if each passage about faith, love, and endurance resonated with the silent wisdom etched deep into his being. But it was at sunset that the monks witnessed something truly extraordinary. Each evening, without fail, Balthasar would rise from his place by the fire and make his way to a small hill at the edge of the monastery grounds. There he would sit still and regale, facing west, toward Rome, toward the place where he had fulfilled his sacred duty. He would remain there until the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, unmoving, watching with a gaze that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. The monksmen, accustomed to reading the signs hidden in the simplicity of life, never disturbed him during these vigils. They understood that something profound was unfolding in the silence. Some believed that Balthasar was keeping watch over the soul of his beloved friend, even across the unseen divide. Others simply saw it as the purest form of remembrance, a loyalty so complete that it transcended time and distance. Meanwhile, the world outside buzzed with stories about the dog who had stayed. News articles, television specials, books, and poems were written about him. His image, a photograph of him, resting his head near the Pope's hand, became an icon, a symbol of a different kind of holiness. Commentators, theologians, and ordinary people alike found themselves moved to tears by the simplicity of his act, by the silent sermon he had preached without ever uttering a single word. In Buenos Aires, the humble neighborhood where Jorge Mario Bergoglio had grown up, a bronze statue was erected. A young boy offering a piece of bread to a stray dog. At the statue's base, A simple inscription was carved in stone. Every living being is a visible trace of God's invisible love. Pilgrims and tourists alike flocked to the site, leaving behind flowers, letters, and small tokens. Leashes, dog collars, children's drawings as offerings, not just to the memory of a pope, but to the spirit of compassion he had lived and died embodying. And in the Vatican, within the archives and memories of those who had known him best, the story of Balthasar was preserved not as mere anecdote, but as testament. A reminder that Francis's greatest legacy was not confined to documents, decrees, or grand reforms. It was written instead in the quiet places of the heart, in the love that bridged the chasm between human and animal, between earth and heaven. Years later, when Balthasar's time finally came, he passed as he had lived peacefully, humbly surrounded by those who loved him. The monks buried him beneath a centuries-old olive tree on the monastery grounds, marking the grave with a simple stone. Upon it they inscribed only a few words, but words that captured the essence of a life faithfully lived. Balthasar, faithful to the end. He taught us that love needs no words, and so his story lived on, whispered in prayers, etched in memory, shining quietly in a world that so often forgets where true greatness lies, not in power, but in the steadfast, silent love that endures, even when all else fades away. In the years that followed, as the world changed and new chapters of history were written, the story of Pope Francis and Balthasar continued to echo like a soft, steady heartbeat beneath the noise of the modern age. It was not the story of an institution, nor the chronicle of political movements or grand revolutions. It was something infinitely simpler, and yet far more enduring, the tale of two souls bound by love, walking together through the final threshold of life. In countless churches, homes, and quiet corners of the world, people shared the story in hushed, reverent tones. Parents told it to their children, priests wove it into homilies about compassion and humility. Strangers recounted it to one another when speaking about the things that truly matter. It became a parable for an age longing for reminders of tenderness, a living testament that in the end it is not our achievements or possessions that define us, but the love we have given and received. From the sprawling cities of Europe to the remote villages of Africa and the highlands of South America, candles were lit not just for the memory of Pope Francis, but for the sacred bond he had shared with a simple, faithful creature. Paintings were made. Songs were written, prayers were whispered into the night, each a thread in the tapestry of remembrance, a small act of reverence for the quiet holiness they had both revealed. Within the walls of the monastery where Balthasar had spent his final years, the monks continued their quiet prayers and labors, carrying forward the memory of the dog who had loved without expectation, guarded without demand, and grieved without bitterness. His grave beneath the ancient olive tree became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking not miracles of power, but miracles of the heart. Visitors knelt beside the simple stone, often leaving not elaborate offerings, but small, sincere tokens: a feather, a wildflower, a handwritten note of gratitude. The final message was clear, woven gently through every telling of the tale. True greatness lies not in being served, but in serving with love. True holiness is not found in titles or honors, but in the silent, steadfast giving of oneself to another. And true legacy is not measured in monuments or accolades, but in the invisible, indestructible bonds of the heart, bonds that stretch across time, across death, across eternity itself. Balthasar had not spoken a single word, yet through his unwavering devotion, he had proclaimed a gospel of love more powerful than any sermon. And Pope Francis, in choosing to spend his final moments not with kings or dignitaries, but with his humble companion, had offered the world one last luminous testimony that, at the end of all things, What remains is love, pure, simple, unbreakable. As the sun set each evening over St. Peter's Square, casting golden light across the ancient stones, pilgrims would often pause, heads bowed, hearts full, remembering not just a pope, but a man who had loved deeply and had been deeply loved in return. And somewhere in the quiet places where heaven and earth nearly touch one, could almost imagine the scene: a man in simple white robes walking once more beside a light-furred dog, their steps silent but sure as they journeyed together into the eternal fields of peace.